Hello. This is the Fight Back podcast, hosted by exercise scientist Georgia Very. Here you'll find a series of honest conversations about martial arts and mental health. My guests and I explore the statement that every martial artist has heard. Martial arts saved me. How and why do combat sports save people? Listen to find out. Everyone, welcome to the Fight Back podcast. Today I'm here with Erin Herle. Erin is a BJJ black belt and a huge mental health advocate. She's the founder of a hashtag and program called Submit the Stigma, which we're going to talk heaps about today. So Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's awesome. I know that we struggled to make this happen just because you're in Oz and I'm in California, but here we are.
Here we are.
Two different times of the day, but it works, you know?
It does. And I'm so grateful to have you on here because I think so much of your work is kind of in parallel with the stuff that we've been pushing here, but it's a little bit different and I think so needed. So let's start by talking about what is the stigma, if we're talking about submitting the stigma.
Right. So the stigma, I felt it very personally because I had my own mental health challenges without realizing that they were mental health challenges. Because sometimes you just think, well, this is who I am and I'm the difficult friend, or I'm the too sensitive friend, or I hold other people's opinions in too high of a regard, those kinds of things. And you're like, well, okay, so what part is the personality and what part is something that is either a disorder or like not healthy, right? It doesn't promote my mental wellness. And so mental wellness was not a thing when I was growing up. My parents weren't big on that. Like, of course, like I went to the dentist, I went to the eye doctor, I went to all the doctor appointments except for mental health because, my parents are boomers and they don't really, maybe they had bad experiences and they're like, you know what, our kid's not crazy, right? So I had a lot of that to battle because I didn't find therapy until after I started Jiu Jitsu. So Jiu Jitsu was like my one thing that I started back in 2009 that I was like, this is my thing and I'm going to pay for it myself. And I'm going to do all these things that promote my well-being, even though in the beginning I was like, I just want to like be aggressive and stuff, not knowing exactly what it was about. And, every barrier that I had with like a new diagnosis, it was always like, I couldn't just tell people like, yep, generalized anxiety disorder, like that's me. Instead, it was like, well, I took this, I went on Craigslist and I found this study that said, if you take this drug, because you have this diagnosis, then you get $500. So I was always like, but it was $500. And I'm like a college student. So at the time I was like, that's a lot. And then when I spoke to my therapist, eventually when I sought professional help, he said, you're either ADHD or you're just smart. And I'm like, well, how does that work? I think I'm going to choose that route. So I went that route and I started medication. But then, I took it more as like when I went back to college and I went to a public university in LA. So it was so hard to get classes because there's so many students and they're all trying to get the same classes. And so when I found out that by having a disability, I could get a better registration date. And I was nearing more towards graduation. And I just like had these classes that I needed to get. So I filled out the form. I had my psychiatrist sign it. And so then it became, well, I just have the diagnosis because now I, get to sign up for classes earlier than everyone else, and I was always looking at it as the perks, never just owning it because I didn't fully understand it. It was just, well, I'm sort of this way. So I guess I'm going to try to help myself, but in my own private way. And so, seeking professional help, it's not like, yes, you can do that alone, but you need a support system outside of that, right? Like your family, your friends. If they're not aware of what's going on, it's very hard for them to support you in general. And then to feel that you're not supported or to feel that you're a burden are very difficult things. And so that really prevents someone from getting help. I mean, I finally, sought out help and it was the best thing I ever did. But I think it was the jiu-jitsu that kind of gave me the confidence to do that. And that's why I sort of put the two together because I'm like, okay, well, I was not a good person in terms of like mental health. I guess like stable and healthy and well until I found jiu-jitsu. And of course it's a progress, right? So I'm still working on it myself and I'm still finding myself and all those things. but I found that people were less likely to get help and also to reach out to their support system when they have these mental health issues. And whether you have a diagnosis or not, like you need support, you need to be able to deal with regular stressors. So yeah, stigma was a big thing for my life. And then I noticed it for everyone else too, like in the jiu-jitsu world. And yeah, so once people started coming out of the woodwork and like holding up the sign that I held up that says Submit the Stigma Mental Illness, it was amazing. It was like the community grew on its own. You know what I mean?
Totally. What made you want to do jiu-jitsu in the beginning? You said it was like an aggression outlet kind of
Yeah.
thing.
So like when I was in high school, like I was really lost. Like I didn't have like a group. I hung out like at hardcore shows like after school and on weekends, but I was kind of like, I didn't want to be in one particular like clique, right? Because I felt like I was too eclectic for that. So it wasn't like I was like, oh, I'm gonna go hang out with the jocks over there. I'm gonna go hang out with the nerds or the magnet smart students or this or that. Like I always felt like I'm more of a rebel. Like I had a group of friends that I grew up with from like fourth grade to like high school, right? But I don't know. I never was good in group settings because I always felt like I never got my way. And I think it's hard when you have like all these voices together, And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna do my own thing. And then I'm like, they stopped inviting me places. Like I got really sad. And so yeah, you find ways to like isolate yourself sometimes. So the only thing that I really did was I hung out with the guys and like I roughhoused with them. I literally wrestled with them. They were like really, really hands-on, like BMX type skateboarders. So yeah, it was just like I always hung out with them and I always wanted to be like one of the guys without wanting to be an athlete. Like I was never an athlete. So jiu-jitsu is something that some of my hardcore friends, my guy friends, went and did. And when I found out about like UFC and I started watching it and stuff, I thought, okay, well, this is really cool. And being in the hardcore scene, I met someone on an online forum that said he was coming out to compete at PANS. And it was 2008. And so when he came out, I was like, all right, do you want to hang out? He's like, yeah. So I pick him up and he's like, okay, what do you want to do? Like, do you mind going to the tournament so I could check on like my teammates? Cause he was from Maryland. And I was like, okay. Like, I just thought it was like some weird bro wrestling thing. And when I got there was females, it was brown and black belt still combined. And I remember watching a match and just being like, women do this. And then I had way too much social anxiety. So it took me like a year to get into a gym, but the first gym that I ended up walking into near my work was Hamala Bahal, who's like multiple time world champion. And I had no idea. I was just like, can I just like sign up? And it was awesome. Like I didn't even realize who it was until, like people are talking about it like, oh yeah, you know how like when he sits and tells stories, like, oh, those are the best. Like, why? They're like, because he's famous. They're like, he's like the Michael Jordan of jiu-jitsu. And I was like, wow. And so I started listening in and hanging out after class and stuff. And I competed like 3 months in and I was just hooked after that. I remember all the guys were about to compete again. And I went over to Hamalo. I'm like, can I sign up? Like, am I good enough? And he's like, sure. Yeah, whatever, man. Like, yeah, if you want. I was like, so you're saying I can't? Like I needed his permission, like his validation. And once I got that, it was just like I was signing up all the time and just getting out there, because it scared me. That's why.
So I want to come back to the point about community because that's been a big thing that's come up in a lot of my research. So we're just going to park that and I'm going to say that out loud so I remember to come back to it. Community. So a lot of my research has centered on the question that I ask all of my podcast guests, which is, why do you think it is that so many people say BJJ saved my life?
I think that so when someone tells you that you have a diagnosis, right, a depression, anything mental health related, they usually tell you a few things. They tell you to be more goal oriented, especially for depression, right? To have something to look forward to, right? Because depression makes us feel like there is nothing to look forward to. And also to find a support system. And the thing is, there's a built-in support system because you can't train jiu-jitsu alone. And you get really comfortable with your training partners, and when they're not there, you're like, damn it, where did Ashley go? Like she's the same size as me. I feel comfortable asking her questions as we drill. I know that she's not going to hurt me. So we have our like important people that we like to train with, and obviously there's a lot of risk involved. I don't know this person and I'm going to go and like full on, full body, full contact, and try to like choke this person, and they're going to try to choke me. So it's a very trusting thing right away. Like you have this bond. It's almost like a trauma bond, it feels like, because you're experiencing things that challenge you in public. It's not a private setting, right? So you share these experiences. So you have the support system. Obviously, exercise. Like I never exercised a day in my life before I started jiu-jitsu. So automatically it was like, wow, I feel like shit when I eat a burrito the night before I train, you know? And you're like, okay, well, maybe I won't eat that. Maybe instead of having 3 cans of Coke for lunch, I'll have water, you know? Because you're like, wow, I don't want to be embarrassed, and I don't want to have everyone laughing at me, or, you know, in my head, I think they're laughing at me because I can't get through a roll, or I fart on someone, or, you know, there's all these things that can happen. So yeah, you have the exercise that doesn't feel like exercise. So those are like 3 things that, or 4 rather, like goal, community, exercise, and also routine. And having a place that you're like, nope, on every Tuesday, Thursday, even if you start with just 2 times a week, you go there and you're like, I'm expected to be there. People are going to ask when I'm not there. And it just becomes a habit rather than, do I really want to train today? Like, am I tired? You know, you got to get excited. So all of those things for me have been like, wow, that's exactly what a mental health professional has told me to do and told me to invest in, you know, like, I think a lot of psychologists will say, you know, why don't you try yoga, you know? And yeah, yoga can have some of those things, but there's no real like goals, right? Like goals are, I'm going to get that next stripe, or I'm going to make sure that Brian doesn't guillotine me as much anymore. Or simply, I want to win that tournament. So there's all these different things that you can strive for. And also there's a little bit of heartbreak involved, like not winning and maybe losing a round or getting your guard passed when you've been working on it for so long. So it helps you really deal with the ups and downs of training. And then you can carry that into life and say, okay, well, this is just a tough time. This is just a tough role, or I made a mistake, but it doesn't mean that I can't, you know, rectify it.
Totally. So we're going to come back to each of those bits. Like I said, I wanted to talk about community, and community always comes up. Like I've basically never asked that question and not had community come up. In research that I conducted, like if you ask 200 people, I asked over 200 people, community is the number one thing that comes up when you ask people like why that would be. And I think it's exactly like you said, right? It's a different kind of community. There's so much trust. There's so much compassion that you have to have for each other, right? It's such a safe space. Like not even if you eat a burrito, but like if someone's squeezing the shit out of you, you might fart, you know?
Yeah.
Like that's
and
okay.
You want to hope that they laugh at you and, you know, we ha ha. Get over it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you know, you might mount me and I might have a panic attack, you know, because you're heavier than me, or just because like it's the end of the day and I'm tired and my resilience bar is totally empty, as opposed to like when I've slept well and I've eaten well and I'm fresh. Or it might be that like the way that my nervous system is responding to my past experiences, you know, we might call that trauma. I have trauma, you could say. That freaked me out. And it's a safe space to know like, well, okay, well, I'm going to freak out and you're just going to be like, okay, dude, like just chill out. It's fine. Like go take some space if you want, or like you want to keep going, or like, oh, okay, like, well, maybe we'll just drill the move from before. Like we won't full on roll, or whatever it's going to be. Like that kind of a community with so much trust on so many levels. You're not going to choke me out. You're not going to hurt me. You're going to hold space for me to do my own thing. I think is so, so critical to what we've evolved to need as humans, which is to be community driven individuals, you know, individuals within a community.
I love that you said the resilience bar, because I just, whenever I am either like overtired or like I've just had a lot of stress, I turn into the biggest bitch. Like, and it's not because I want to, like my boyfriend will just start annoying the shit out of me sometimes. And it's only because I had like a stressful day. And not that it means that, okay, it's totally fine for me to be a dick to him or anything, but it's definitely, it makes me think of like a video game, you know, like this is how much I can handle if I have this much rest. And then, you know, and then it's like, okay, my patience is wearing thin.
Yeah, I think gamifying life is like the ultimate way to live with all kinds of things. And it's a nice way to think about like self-care and all those terms that are really popularized now, which is like, well, how do you put back into your cup? How do you reload the bar? And for you, that might look like taking a bath or journaling or meditating, but like also sitting in the bath might be scary as shit because you're alone with your thoughts and you actually get more anxious with that, right? Meditating might be terrible because the only thoughts that come in are bad thoughts because like that's all that you've known. That's your habit. You haven't sought help from mental health yet, or maybe you are, right? There's no judgment on that. That's very normal. And I hear that all the time, that a lot of people get told self-care is meditating, self-care is sitting with your thoughts, and it stresses them out so much. And then they think they're even more broken, right? I can't do that. Therefore, how am I ever going to have mindfulness? It's like, well, dude, go roll, go kickbox, go smash pads, be completely present in the moment, because if you don't, your training partner's going to hit you. They're going to submit you, right? And find your way of being in your body through that way. It's going to be different for everyone. I have nothing against yoga and meditation. I meditate. I don't do yoga, but I have nothing against yoga. It's just going to, like, different things are going to work for different people. And some people are, I think, like high energy people. They need to be distracted all the time.
I need to get my rage out sometimes. I think that's kind of what it is. Otherwise, I just become like a very ragey person. It comes out in my driving. It comes out in my interactions with strangers sometimes. Like, I'm just, you know, there's some days when you're like, hello, how are you? Like some stranger. And there's other times when you can't even make eye contact. It's like, you give, like, there's a cashier, you just give them your money. Like, yeah, cool. Yeah. You know, and, yeah, that's really interesting. And I love that it's like for different people, different things. And it's funny because like I feel like I'm going through my whole life, just like adding things that help and kind of like picking and choosing things that don't, but I have to try it first, right? To really know. Like, I've done the yoga, I've tried the meditation, I've tried those things. And obviously going into MMA and trying kickboxing and loving it and feeling like a white belt again is really like amazing too. Cause I'm like, okay, yeah, I do like punching people. And I actually don't mind getting punched in the face. Usually, like, if someone punches me in the face, it makes me want to not avenge it, but to, you know what I mean? Like, get better.
I do.
You know, it's like a hunger rather than like a defeat, you know?
Yeah, that's the other special part of that community, right? It's like, you punch me in the face and I'm not mad. I'm kind of like, that was good. And I'll tell you, like, oh, like, I'll be like, oh, hey, that was good. Now I'm going to get you back, you know,
nice.
like,
yeah.
And I think it's the same thing in most martial arts. And, you know, I really like how you said about on different days that rage is going to be there and it's going to come out somehow. If we come back to thinking about like gamifying life, and we think about emotions are like charges that get stored in our bodies. And if you think about animals, right, what they do when that happens, when an emotion gets stuck, you know, like they've been sprinting away from a tiger, or maybe they had to play dead or something like that, and there was an emotion that got stuck in their body, they get up and they shake, right? If anyone has a cat or a dog, I don't know if cats do this actually, but dogs, I think definitely.
Cats do. Yeah, cats do. They're traumatized. Okay. Like, oh yeah, they do.
Cats do. I've never had a cat, but
that's why I have a mug that says "World's Greatest Cat, Mom."
you know them, but you know, right? They get up and they will physically shake, like they will physically discharge emotions. And I think that everybody needs to have some kind of way of doing that. And it's actually quite rare that you can do that like just with words or just with journaling to discharge it. There's always going to be a little bit of something that lingers from that animal part of our brain that like wants to physically get that out, whether that be through swimming or running or lifting weights or doing a martial art. Like, it doesn't matter. You've just got to find like the physical outlet that works for you.
Very true. For kids too, right? That's why, like, you know, they always said that ADHD kids or ADD kids just can't sit still. And I'm like, I don't think it's like that, especially not for females, which took me so long to realize that I am an, you know, ADD female, because it comes out, it's not just like fidgeting and stuff. It's very far from it. But, you know, being the rebel in class, you know, like not being able to listen, it's like, well, if you put their attention to something that really allows them to like get it out, but in a religious manner, that's like, I remember there was a really weird analogy, but there was like a Bob's Burgers thing. Like a scene, and I don't even really watch it that much, but it's like they're showing the bed and the whole family's sleeping in the bed, and they're like, this is where I sleep, this is where I sleep, and then it just shows Tina and she goes, this is where I thrash, and she just like, and I'm thinking I could have used that as a kid, you know, like being so frustrated or I didn't know what to do with all my energy, if my mom is just like, just go in your room and thrash, I probably would have been a lot better off, not knowing it, just because it was so pent up. So it just, when I saw that, I was like, that speaks to me. I don't think I would ever say that out loud or like actually do it, but I don't know why an adult cartoon was like, it like knew me.
And I mean, now that's becoming like really commonplace in psychotherapy, yes, psychology kind of worlds, right? Like physically shaking out trauma, like finding some kind of discharge for energy is becoming part of like literature. It's becoming commonplace. And I think like that's one part of submitting the stigma, right? Is having more research, being like, well, actually this is normal, and these things that you like intuitively thought were what you wanted to do, like you wanted to move around, are good, right? Your body probably has this special kind of wisdom.
It's very validating.
It's so validating, right? And then I think the other hand of it, which is what your Instagram account in particular is doing so well, is having all these people like put their hand up and say like, this is what happened to me. Like, this is what I've been living with. This is what I've been doing. And like, here's, and it's themed around jiu-jitsu. Saying like, and then this is what I got to now. It normalizes it.
How jiu-jitsu saved them pretty much, in some manner. And I think that a lot of people have a very similar journey, and maybe it's coming out of like a tough breakup. I've heard a lot of females talk about that, or they are domestic assault survivors, right? Domestic abuse and things like that. So it doesn't always obviously need to be so heavy like mine was, where I was just like, I don't know, I just like to wrestle with the guys. And it ended up being something so much more. And I think people don't expect that. They might sign up for one of those reasons, even if it is for community or mental health, but it's really easy to get like really deep into the culture. And I've never seen that with anything else. I've seen people take something and make their identity about, their whole identity becomes that, right? Like someone who starts jiu-jitsu gets their blue belt and adds BJJ at the end of their username. We laugh, but it's so funny because they find their full identity in it. And it's different. It's not just, oh, I'm such a Star Wars fan, right? It's not just like, like I love books and I have a book club and I'm just such a book nerd. There's something different. And I think kickboxing is something similar, but even still, kickboxing doesn't have like the lineage necessarily and the tradition, I guess, because it's not. It's more mainstream, I think. And you can obviously speak more to it. Like I train Dutch kickboxing and I love it. And my coach, Anthony Hardonk, is Dutch. I feel like it's very authentic. And so, with jiu-jitsu, it's very like, no, this is what we do. We bow when we get on the mat. We have this many stripes for this rank. And then we have these ranks. And it's all very unified. And it's like someone says, I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. And immediately you're like, oh, under who? Like it's still such a small world and people are being exposed for like fake black belts and things like that. So it's very just submersive, and it's really interesting how that always happens. I find it very rare that someone just goes to class and then goes home, goes to class, goes home, and like does nothing else. You know what I mean?
I think it's so interesting that that's been your perspective, is that it's the more tradition and the lineage and things like that. And I agree to an extent, because I come from traditional karate, which I think is even more steeped in like the tradition,
Right.
But from my perspective, I think what makes jiu-jitsu so all-encompassing as part of like who you are and what you do is that it's so real. Like with kickboxing, I mean, I grew up striking. I started when I was 12. Wow. I've had like 5 professional kickboxing fights. Wow, and I know what it's like to get punched in the face hard as somebody can, but only because I got to the point where I trained and got in the ring. But you could train kickboxing, and I have lots of friends who are beautiful technicians on pads who have never had a fight. They are very proficient in kickboxing. We don't have a belt system. So like if someone says like, oh, you do kickboxing, they'll say like, oh, how many fights have you had? It's not like jiu-jitsu where someone would say like, well, how many times have you competed? It's what belt are you?
Yes.
And because that's missing, for one thing, that's one part of it, is that it's like there's no measure. But then the other part of it is you've just never tested yourself. So you don't have this like experiential knowledge of like, well, how well does my kickboxing work? Whereas if someone shows a move and you learn a new technique, you try it on someone, it doesn't work, you go like, okay, I know it doesn't work, because in roles we effectively go 100%, right? Because you can tap. Yes. You can't go 100% in sparring and kickboxing. Yeah. We would all have brain damage, right?
Exactly. It'd be a little late. Yeah, we'd be on the floor.
Yeah. And I think that is a whole other level of confidence. When you can escape a triangle, you can escape mount, like those kind of things are very, very changing to your perception of yourself, because you can imagine in a street situation what you might do. You can always bring in like, oh, they might have a gun, they might have a knife. It's like, okay, but your body actually responds differently. You hold yourself so differently.
It's true.
It's true, right?
It's true. Posturing and like, not just to like, so, me traveling to different countries, for example, and being like a little white girl, it's very like, I'll go alone all the time. Like I went to Brazil alone, and people will tell you, little tips and tricks, like don't have your phone out, always be aware. And it's like, I do that everywhere. It's not just the dangerous places. And there's something that I don't know if people would always agree with me, but when you posture like a victim or act like a victim, you tend to become one. And I'm not saying that victims ever ask for it, right? I would never, ever say that. But there's a difference between, walking around like this versus, looking up. And I specifically do that because I've learned what body language really looks like, and what's threatening and what's not, and what's, and I'm putting myself in better situations as I go without even thinking about it. Right. I might take a certain way without realizing like, it's probably just safer this way. Like, or I'm just not dumb and I just don't put myself in horrible situations that something might happen, but with jiu-jitsu, it was always, I always made the joke that if I ever had to use it in the real world, I would just pull guard, because I never went for takedowns. And, since doing striking and having stand up and really paying attention to wrestling, I never realized before how important it was to my well-being. And obviously I have more confidence now, but I had confidence before, but now it's a little bit different. Like, of course, I had one amateur MMA fight and I used my striking a lot, which was, fun for me because it was important that I feel what it was like to get punched in the face, because I could have gone in there and just like gone straight for the takedown, but what would I have learned and what would I have experienced? Nothing. Like I went and did the whole thing, and I ended up winning by TKO, and it was the best thing ever because I really thought that she was going to turn away and I was going to have to like submit her. And I guess because it's amateur, they're like, all right, that's good enough. So they called it, off like the ground and pound. And I thought, it didn't really matter like what I got to show, but it was more about what I got to experience. I got to experience being kicked and being punched, and by someone who really wants to hurt me, who really wants me to lose. And so having that experience and even in training, sometimes you get some good shots from people, and that makes it more realistic, because someone might come and grab me, or they might grab something of mine. And of course, having that close contact is great for jiu-jitsu. But what happens when I just want to get the person away? There was a time, the only time, because people have asked me, like, have you ever had to use it? Have you ever had to use your jiu-jitsu in the real world? And I said, well, my ex and his brother and I were on a beach in Miami, and we left our bag there because we had to pay for like an umbrella thing, which was so stupid. But we thought, okay, well, there's dudes like standing over there, probably going to protect our stuff. Plus in California, people are really like easygoing, and you can leave your stuff and they're not going to, you know what I mean? It's sort of like, everyone has their stuff out. So if one person's, you know what I mean? And so, we found out that it was missing, and we ended up finding, the Find My iPhone app. And so we find the guy, and he's this, I don't know, I wouldn't say that he was homeless, but he definitely wasn't clean. And I had no clothes on except for my bathing suit. And I wanted to stop him because he started like walking away, like, no, this is my bag. And we're like, dude, that's not your bag. So he said something like, I'm going to shank you. And he never like produced any like knife or anything, but I didn't want to touch him because I'm like, well, okay, yeah, I could totally subdue him, take his back, wait for the cops to come. But I'm like, I don't want to touch him. I'm not comfortable doing that with a stranger, and especially wearing no clothes. And so I wish that I had known a little bit more of like stand up, to be able to have that. I ended up just running behind him until the cops showed up.
Yeah.
And then they were just like, all right, we got it from here. And I was like, okay, thanks. But now I'm like, okay, I can handle myself. I definitely know, like, even if it was just having like a zone defense and pushing the person away, things like that would have been so much better than having to rely on like body locking someone or like jumping on their back. It's like, you think about it and you're like, oh yeah, I would definitely do it. And then you're like, you get in the situation and you're like, don't really want to touch this person,
Totally.
So yeah, I'm really, that's like, there's such a gap. Right. And so I'm so glad that I have done that now, and that I have like more of an understanding and more realistic, right? Because obviously being a female who travels, I need to have that. And I feel very confident, and I feel very, like postured, and like I'm more aware, I guess. And I think that a self-defense class isn't going to teach you that. And especially if you take maybe like a weekend class, it's not going to be enough. You're not going to remember that in a time where someone's attacking you. So I'm always grateful that I have the 12 years of martial arts experience to be able to just like, to know it, have that muscle memory. And I'm sure that you can totally relate. Like, I don't know if you've ever had an opportunity, I call it, to use it on the streets, because if you do, like, I want to hear about it.
I know. And people ask me the same thing all the time. Like, have you ever got to use it? Did you ever use it? And luckily for me, it's never come up, but definitely the way, I think that like the things that you're willing to do can sound bad, but like, and the way that you're willing to respond to things is very different. Like, okay, I'll give an example. Is I was in Thailand. It was my first time in Thailand, and I was like over there to train Muay Thai. And in Phuket, there's like this one famous street where all of the really big gyms are, like Tiger Muay Thai and Phuket Top Team, and there's like lots of other gyms, which if anyone watches the UFC, like they've probably heard of Tiger Muay Thai. And anyway, it's of course, this really niche tourist destination just for people who are going to fight, and people who are like into fitness and yoga now as well, but really for fighters. So you can say to like anyone, like, oh, I'm here to train at Tiger Muay Thai Phuket Top Team, and like they'll know, the locals.
Okay.
And anyway, I booked an Airbnb before I had gotten there, but I got in really late. My flight got in at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, okay, I'm going to just get a taxi, and I'm going to take the taxi like onto the Soy, which is like what the name of the street is. And then I'll, like go to my Airbnb. But when we got there, it was just like me traveling solo with this taxi driver. And I was like, we're going to be dumb. I was just like, all right, see you. And he was like, but how do I know you got in safe? And I was like, oh, because he was asking me like, well, what's the hotel called? And I was like, no, it's an Airbnb, like it's someone's house kind of thing. Yeah. And he was just not computing. He was like, no, I want to see you got home safe. And I was like, okay, cool. It's the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, right? Because it didn't exist, the Airbnb, like totally didn't exist. And I was calling and they were like not picking up. So it was just like me, little white girl, right? Like totally by myself with my taxi driver, who was super nice. And we're just like on this street being like, what the fuck? Like, where am I going to sleep? And we ended up like driving around, looking at places, like nowhere was open. We finally found like this group of people who were drinking, and this little Thai woman like came up, and he spoke to her in Thai, and she was like, okay, yeah, I'm like, I'll find this place, like come follow me down this alley. So it's just like me and these two Thais, like totally dark, just like walking down this alley, finally got to this place where this guy took me in. But I think about like how much I know now about the nervous system and trauma, and how easy it is to go into a freeze response. And I think that if I didn't feel comfortable walking down a dark alley, knowing that like if someone quickly turned, like I would do something, I just wouldn't have walked. I think I would have just frozen and broken down and been like, I don't know what to do, like just imploded, which happens all the time. And I think just the ability to have agency is like an application of the self-defense relative to actually using the self-defense. And I think that comes up quite a lot. And some of people that I know, some researchers who do karate research and like other similar research, will talk a lot about how doing martial arts makes you take up space. Like particularly women consciously choose not to take up space. You know, we cross our legs and we try and make ourselves small. And that's like really the way that we're programmed. And you see it on the mats, right? You see like new women will move out of the way of
Mm-hmm.
like white belt girl next to a white belt guy, like two girls rolling, two guys rolling. The guys will roll into them and the girls will keep moving out of the way. You see it in kickboxing too. If there's sparring, girls will have this like sixth
Absolutely.
sense where they're looking for like, where are the
Yep.
guys? I'll
Yep.
move out of the way. Guys are just like plowing through, you know, and
Yep.
everyone's just like, oh, boys will be boys.
Yes.
But there's this thing that changes and all of a sudden you go like, fuck no, like I'm here, I'm not moving. Oh, you bumped
Mm-hmm.
into me, I wasn't moving, I was
Yeah.
standing here with my training partner, you hit me, it's your fault. And they'll go like, oh, and that's the switch. Like, and that can happen from any martial art, I think, but like
Yes.
taking up space and being like, I deserve to take space and I'm commanding it. And like you said, your posture changes. And you are statistically, there's research on this too. There's a really cool research study where they
Love
took
this.
past victims of trauma and they put them into kickboxing, and they showed that it reduced re-victimization because they held themselves differently. They had a different belief about
Yes.
themselves. So it's again, it's not victim blaming. It's not saying like anyone deserved it, but on some level, like all women have got to play defense.
Yes.
That's just the
Yes.
reality of the world that we're in
Yes.
at the moment.
There's so many women's groups. Specifically, there's one on Facebook, and I've been a member of it for so long, and I don't even really post. And I look on my group page on Facebook, and then I see posts and stuff. And I remember seeing this one time where someone commented, because women who are new will go on there and say, how do I deal with this person? What do I do when this happens? And I saw a comment that basically said, like, have you decided to talk to him? Have you actually told him? Like, have you tried to actually face it head on, rather than beating around the bush or feeling like you don't belong there, or that because you're a woman, or because you're a white belt, or because you're new, or because you haven't had a fight, that you are less than, or you don't deserve to be there. So I found a lot of situations that it could literally be just take up more space and you deserve to be there. Especially in jiu-jitsu, they teach you that as a higher belt, if you are rolling next to someone who is a higher belt, you're supposed to move, right? That's sort of the tradition. But it doesn't really make any sense, because then it puts people in like that, okay, you're a white belt, you don't deserve to be here, you're less than, and you deserve to get injured, and I'm going to roll on top of you. Well, when I went to Marcelo Garcia's and I trained with him, he had a very easy solution. He says, if you're rolling and you look over and there are feet by you, and you think that you're going to get kicked, instead of stopping those other people, no matter what belt they are, and telling them to move, just move, get out of the danger.
So
If there's
simple.
danger, just move,
Yeah.
And so I've literally seen people be like, like they'll stop their roll and look at the other people and go, can you move? And it's like, wow, you just wasted so much time. You just interrupted now 2 training sessions, and you could have easily just moved out of the way for 2 seconds. I mean, most of the time, if you're the person on top and the person on bottom, they're not really looking around. Person on top can see more. And it's real easy to just be like, either, hey, let's move over there, or just pull them out of the way. And so sometimes the whole rule set of like the tradition, right, is actually pretty, I don't know, asinine, I would say. I just think that like it's there to give ego, I think, which is funny because they say in martial arts, and especially jujitsu, to leave your ego at the door. So there's a lot of situations that people have a hard time battling that. And mostly it's going to be because, oh, they're a higher belt, or they've been training there longer than me. And it's like, no, we are first and foremost, we are human beings, and we need to treat each other that way. And it's just like when I talk about the support system and the community, it's like you look out for one another, right? Like I'm not going to armbar my so-called Ashley friend too hard, because I want to make sure that she comes back. And I'm also not just going to beat her to shit because I want her to get better. Because if she gets better, I get better. You know what I mean?
I love that so much.
There's a lot. I mean, like I hate when people are like, oh, iron sharpens iron. But I mean, it really is true, like if I may get the same thing on you all the time, right? And then one day you kind of figure it out and you're like, wow, okay, either you asked the instructor and said, how do I deal with this? Or you just started experimenting and trying different things, and all of a sudden I can't do that same move on you, right? Well, instead of me being frustrated and going, oh, like I can't do it anymore, it just makes me have to go to the professor too and say, damn it, she totally figured me out. How do I get better? Because there's always going to be someone that has the antidote, right? There's no perfect sequence. There's no perfect combo, right? Everything in time and different ways that you do things depending on the sport. But it's definitely something where it's like, I should not want to prevent someone from getting better. I also shouldn't prevent someone from being on the mat with me, just because of an ego trip or something like that,
So if you think about the types of cultural changes that you could make, this is an interesting question, I think. So say you had a magic wand, right? And you could found a gym or transform a gym so that there was no mental health stigma. And in fact, the other end of that spectrum, where it was like a gym where it was like, we're a mental health advocacy gym. Like, we're a safe space for you to like work through your depression, your anxiety, like whatever you've got going on, like we fully support that. Mm-hmm. How would that gym look differently to the traditional kind of gym that you would expect to walk into?
So it's funny because like whenever I teach a seminar, for example, I wait till the end, but the way that I carry on my seminars is I have found that I am authentic. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I cuss. And if kids want to be present, I let them know. I don't really teach kids just because of that. Mm-hmm. And I make dick and fart jokes. And that's just how I am. Like I think that jiu-jitsu is very awkward, and you learn full guard. You're like, wow, this is missionary position. I've been here before. And so there's a lot of awkward situations. I mean, I so many times I'll spin to like a spinning arm bar and like my butt cheek, like hits my training partner's nose. And it's like, there's so many weird things that happen that you have to have a sense of humor. So I have found that humor has been one of the biggest things about mental health that has helped me. Not that, okay, I make everything a joke or I laugh things off. Like, there are definitely serious things, but I'm always going to keep it light, because if things have tension and if things are already very serious, it tends to create an environment that doesn't allow for mistakes, that doesn't allow for failures. And those are necessary, right? And so I find that a lot of the spaces that I have created, right? Because when I go into a gym, obviously they have their own community, they have their own existing, right? But a lot of times with seminars, they're like, okay, just do whatever you want. We'll do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And I never try to like change it too much. I always ask them like, all right, do you do just a clap? Do you do 1, 2, 3 clap? So I try to keep it obviously similar. And people laugh at me and I'm like, no, because that's a different thing. It's not the same everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I'm not, I want to see what other people do. I want to learn from that too. And so I definitely like to make sure that it's like comfortable for them, but I make fun of myself, and like I make jokes, because if people don't laugh while they're training, I'm like, why are you here? If you're not smiling, then why are you here? Right? It's not your job. I don't care if you are a black belt, elite, world champion athlete. Like, if you don't enjoy what you do, why would you do it? Because there's a lot of grief involved, right? There's grief in losing competitions, in you're having injuries, in the weight cuts. I mean, there's so much stress involved. Why make it worse? And I know that I almost became a firefighter, not that I was really like in it. But I know that with first responders, they have a very different sense of humor, because they deal with very, very heavy things, right? Obviously more so than a martial arts gym. And so a gym for me is something that make, sense of humor, making jokes and allowing people to speak, which sounds weird, but I come from a couple militant places that are like, no, you're there, you shut your mouth and you drill, and it's like, okay, but this is also kind of my social time. And if you make so many rules, right, then I'm not going to be able to be authentic, and I'm going to feel a shame and guilt on who I am. And if I can't bring who I am on the mat, that's going to be really hard for me, and I'm not going to enjoy it. So I love having the different personalities in a gym. I pick up on that right away. You can always tell who the clown is. You can always tell, who the real serious macho guy is, maybe the real competitor dude. So it's always fun to figure that out when you go and visit. And so I always speak about mental health afterwards, and I've always made it really chill, right? Because if I'm speaking about it since I started Smith the Stigma, I can't come in and be like, hey guys, my dad killed himself, therefore I have a nonprofit. Like that's a little fucking heavy.
Yeah.
So I kind of just speak from experience, and I just tell people to check in on one another. And I've sort of made it like this chill way of just being like, hey man, like, you know how you love training with Robert every day? Like, well, it would suck if he wasn't there because he wasn't feeling great. So, just check in on him and say, hey, is everything okay? And maybe they don't tell you, but at least they know that they're not alone. And that's a big feeling when we have mental health issues. So when I go in, like, and I think of this like perfect, mental health gym, I think wherever I go, I try to create that. And I think it takes one or two people just being authentic, usually the person in charge, right? Because it always comes from the top down.
Mm-hmm.
But having someone who makes fun of themselves, who talks about their failures, who admits their wrongs, but also on the other end of the spectrum, speaks very like highly of themselves, never really talks down to themselves in terms of like, oh, I'm a shitty black belt, or oh yeah, I lost because I suck. They never say self-deprecating things just to say those. Like, obviously I'm gonna say something like, self-deprecating as humor, but you're always going to be able to tell the difference with my body language versus me being seriously saying something like that. I've also had very interesting talks with instructors who have not agreed with the way that I use my facial expressions, which I feel like I can't control a lot. And how I act, or, oh, like if I'm not so inviting sometimes, or whatever it is, or if I'm talking too much.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all things that I've heard before. And I've spent a lot of time being like, oh, I shouldn't be all these things. I shouldn't be all these things. And then when I branched out and I stopped subscribing to the gyms and really going out, just teaching seminars and training everywhere and being more open-minded, I found that I find my people right away now. And the thing is that you learn about with mental health issues or people who are like-minded and are open, it creates an openness. And so being able to talk and being able to say, hey, you good? Like, oh no, I think I'm gonna have a panic attack. Or, my boyfriend just broke up with me. Well, hey man, this training session, I don't need it. I can go and sit and talk with you, or whatever it is, but open-mindedness, humor, things like that. It's funny because I never had someone really ask that. And I'm like, I like this idea. This is my goal. My goal would be to create an instructor program where I can teach people about mental health and how to identify it. And then just being a little bit more open-minded by the instructor, the owner's views, is just accepting people for who they are, rather than, oh, they're just creating chaos, or they're just creating a scene or asking for attention. It's like, yeah, totally. They are asking for attention. They just don't know how to say it or why, because I definitely, I had moments where if I went to training, this was before I really knew what was going on with me, but if I went to training and I wanted to pair up with Stephanie, but Stephanie saw that her best friend Alex was there and they paired up, and I didn't have anyone to pair up with right away, I would leave. I would go to Cobrian and I would say, I have to go. He's like, but class hasn't started yet. And I'm like, he's like, what do you, and I was like, I don't know. I have to leave. And I would go in the dressing room and just cry, thinking that no one likes me. I created this narrative in my head. Mm-hmm. So I've definitely battled these things and not realized, and then, learned along the way of who understands and who doesn't. And there's a very big difference. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. And I think what you said about just checking in is it's the simplest thing, but it's so important. And it has so many applications, right? There's the mental health check-in, which is before class or after class, hey, Erin, how are you doing? How are you actually going? Yeah. What's going on for you? Are you feeling good? Do you need to talk? Anything like that? And then there's a more specific check-in, which I would also love to see implemented, which is before we roll, just a quick check-in, you want to go pull harder or you want to go lighter today, right? Because we don't say that. It just gets slap fist, we go straight away. And then in my head, I'm thinking I got a comp in 2 weeks, I'm rolling hard, right? You're thinking, well, I'm actually my resilience bar is really low. I would love to flow roll and just work the move or work this thing that I've been having trouble with. And what ends up happening is maybe I smash you, so I don't get anything from it because I'm going 100%. You feel terrible. You go home and cry because you're like, I suck at Jiu Jitsu. I just got mauled. And it's actually just because we didn't say one thing, which was how hard do you want to go? Yes. And at that point, if you had said, I need to go 50%, I'm having a hard day, and we had a kind of gym that was like a safe space where you really felt like you could say that too. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just like, I don't know, I think it's the same all around the world, but it like, when someone's like, how you going? No one's like, terrible, you know, like the given response is like, yeah, good. Yeah, not good. And if someone was like, I'm terrible, I'm about to have a breakdown, like, I think most people would be empathetic. Like, they wouldn't just be like, okay, go away. But most people feel like they would walk away slowly. Yeah, the expected response is just to be like, yeah, good. And it's such a break from what we expect. So we're not really asking people how you're going. It's just like it's a formality. So having a culture where you say, okay, well, if I ask you, how hard do you want to go? And you say like 50%, then I honor that. And then look what happens. Like, we get so much more out of it. I can like work on stuff that I want to work on. You get to work on stuff that you want to work on. And like, now we actually both win, right? Because we met each other where we're both at. You didn't have to try and come get pulled to me. And then like, I got nothing from it anyway.
Yeah. It reminds me of striking, because obviously it's very hard to, have control when you're just starting. So when I would spar, okay, even though it was like light sparring, sometimes I would go for a cross while I was going backwards, and like the person sort of walked into it, you know, and it landed pretty hard. And also, like, I would say sorry, right? But I don't say sorry like, sorry I hit you, because I'm not sorry. Like, I'm actually really happy that I hit you because I did something right for once. But also I say it out loud, because I say, I don't mean to go that hard. It's because in striking, it's so easy to land a hard punch and the person's going to come back like 10 times harder. Right. It's just intuition, I guess. And it's just automatically, you're like, okay, all right, we're going this. So if I ever feel like I land hard, I will actually say, like, I didn't mean to hit you that hard. I'm not trying to elevate this or like make this any worse than it already has. Like, so in training in jiu-jitsu, it's a lot easier, right? And we have this word called, or phrase called like the flow roll, which I will admittedly tell people that I suck at. Because I have a hard time, because I feel like there's choice involved rather than just taking what's there and reacting. And there's so much thinking involved. Like, and I sit there and I go, how much should I give this person? Like, if they go for my arm, am I an asshole because I defend it, or do you know what I mean? And I never understood, or I've been told, okay, go 30%. I'm like, fuck if I know what that is. I don't know what 30% is. So I will tell people that, and they go, oh, do you want a flow roll? I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's like, let's do self-care. And I'm like, okay, but like what type? It's very vague. But I understand how to go with like lower belts now. And because girls have this thing that they always say to me, oh my God, you're going to beat me up. So they always tell me when I go to roll with them, because I have a black belt around my waist, and you know, they're just being like, I don't want to say flirty, because women just flirt, like it's flirty, you know, like obviously there's no like attraction or anything, it's just friendly, but like being like, oh, you're gonna get me. And so I hear that a lot, and so I'm always like, okay, so I shouldn't go hard on them, you know, and sometimes I want to, and then it's just weird. It's definitely weird especially being an instructor as well. Because then you're expected to never like hurt someone and then let them learn, or sometimes they expect you to beat their ass, you know, and if you don't, they're like, wow, they're not a great instructor. So all these things go through my head. I don't know if they go through anyone else's, but flow rolling is definitely something that I'm not great at. But also I remember being told, when I was in comp class, and being told by someone, you roll too hard. And I'm just like, I'm trying to get ready for Worlds. Like, you're the same belt as I am. We've been training for years. Like, you know, and I got really angry at her because she said it in a way that was like, I don't want to go with you. You go too hard. And so I had like a tizzy fit about it. And I was like telling people, I'm like, oh yeah, because I go so hard, right? I'm just such a mess. Oh, I'm so awful. You know, I was just like kind of making a dick move about it. But really I should have been, I guess I shouldn't have been able to translate, but if she would have communicated better and said, I'm not going hard today, can we go a lighter roll? That would have been way better. Instead, I was very offended because she, like, no one wants to be called a spaz. You know, that's like the worst thing to be called in jiu-jitsu. And so when someone says something like, oh, you go too rough, like you're too rough, it made me feel like as if I don't care about my training partners. And if I haven't, always been really nice about training, but there's a difference between training hard and for a competition, and then just being like, yeah, do whatever you want. But you're right, that communication would be so much better. And I think I always say things out loud when no one asks, because I'm subconsciously trying to create that. So I'll automatically either be like, oh man, I'm feeling great today. And that's just supposed to be like, yep, you can do anything you want. Or I'm like, fuck, dude, I don't want to be here. There's a difference, and then people kind of gauge like how much they can push me on that day.
That's like, I think the classic human trait, right? You're sitting in a room, you're like, oh, it's kind of cold. Instead of being like, can you pass me a blanket? Can you close the window? Right? We won't say specifically what we want. And again, I often think about things through the lens of being a woman. And I think that it's more difficult for women to specifically say, like, this is what I want directly, because that's quite a male trait, but men definitely have that too. And that's like quite embedded within our societies. We're all kind of like going around each other, just like trying to give hints, drop hints instead of saying what we actually want to say. And there's lots of layers to that too. Like, it does take a certain level of confidence, unfortunately, in a lot of settings, to speak up if that's not the norm. And that's why I talk about like a culture of it being normal is so different to you having to be the one person who says to each person, this is how I want to dictate my role. But I also think, like, to your point, I don't know if you find this helpful, but I love the book, The Four Agreements. Do you know it?
I've heard of it, but I've never read it.
Amazing book, super short, like really easy to read. And it's about like 4 agreements you can make with yourself that's going to make your life a lot easier, basically. And it just talks about how everything that anyone says is from them. It's their bullshit, right? It's their projection onto you. So in that case where someone said like, oh, you roll hard, like, I don't want to roll with you, that's them saying like, I'm not good enough to roll with you, and I got flattened, and I feel like now I feel bad about it. So I'm going to take what the author, Don Miguel Ruiz, would call poison. I'm going to take the poison that I like hold about myself, my insecurities, and it's so painful for me to hold on to. I'm going to throw it back at you. And now you're going to take it and you're going to throw it at somebody else, right? Because it's uncomfortable for you to hold. And it's like this consistent cascading spiral where I think like it's so hard. And like, I grit my teeth saying this to myself. Sometimes when people say things to me, I'm like, don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. Like, that's one of the agreements. Just like, don't take other people's bullshit as reality, because that's their projections onto you. And it has almost nothing, a lot of the time, to do with you as a person. It's to do with their bullshit, their resilience bar that day, like all of the things that led up to that moment. You were probably just the straw that broke the camel's back for them to finally throw their poison at you. So it's hard. And, like, I think it takes a lot of time to practice being in yourself and recognizing your body. And that's where mindfulness can be useful. And you can do it in jiu-jitsu too. Like, you can notice, and I'm sure you do this because you've been training for a long time, right? Like, I know in sparring, I notice when I'm mouth breathing, that means I've lost control of my emotions, right? Or my face gets really angry. Like, I really bite down on my mouth guard and I'm like snarling, right? And as soon as I feel that, I'm like, oh, I'm acting just like completely on instinct. There's no planning going on here. I'm not setting anything up. I'm just like angry and attacking. Once you can recognize that in your physiology, it applies to other things, right? You said to me, Georgia, you're so fat. Why, like, you're hurting me in mount, like, you're so heavy.
Oh my God.
Imagine you said that to me, right? I would feel my physiology spike, right? I would be like, and I would feel my heart rate go up and I would get angry and I would want to say something. Well, if I'm used to noticing that in myself, I can maybe, not always, because I'm not perfect, but sometimes I can notice that and I can go, oh, you're having a response. Does it belong to you or is it theirs? Oh, you can let that go. And then it just like cuts the cascade off. And I think that that's one of the things that doing sports and movement practices to get you into your body are so useful for. They're like little interjects between you doing like the punch the person, yell at the person, whatever.
Well, like there was something that I put together, and it was like this one wrestling class, and it was, like the collar tie, right? So you're leaning into someone and you're holding the back of their neck, and you have to put weight down, obviously, because otherwise they would just be like, get off of me. But there's a fine line between how much you give of yourself, right? So if I were to put all of my weight forward and all you did was move back, and I ended up going with you and I ended up falling over because I was so committed to what you were doing, that's obviously really bad for me. So you have to find the balance of always having your own base. So if I'm going to be having the collar tie and pushing down, I have to know that if you leave, I'm not going to tip over. Right. And so there's a lot of situations in that, like even in jujitsu, but jujitsu even more so because it's very yin and yang. There's very much like a dichotomy there because you can't have guard without a passer and vice versa. So it's a lot of the opposites, right? So if I'm pushing, then they're going to either push back or pull, right? And so knowing that I have to maintain my base, I cannot lean on you too much has been really important too. And that kind of, I feel like relates to you saying like, is this a me thing or is it a them thing? Because we get so absorbed into what the other person is doing, especially when you're physically connected to that person. We don't even realize it because that's a language in itself, but I can feel your grips go from this to this, right? And sometimes that can be scary. That's why white belts are very scary to roll with because that's all they have. And if you amp someone up, even like just I swept them, right? And there's nothing personal about it, but I swept them. And then they have this like emotional response that can feel really scary because then all of a sudden you have to be defensive. And sometimes people don't recognize that. I had a training partner who actually really injured our other training partner. She had to get 2 knee surgeries out of it. And she's very technical, the sweetest person. But when she would roll, she would get like ragey and she would just like rage and use all of her strength. And she was very strong. And she like, it was weird. Like something just like turned whenever we would spar. And so she was like making an effort to go back to fundamental classes to just focus on the technique and not get so absorbed. And she's, obviously a way better human being for it, a better instructor, a better trainer, but she finally recognized that. But unfortunately it took like, having one of her good friends being injured. But it's weird because people do that. They get in their fields, they get in their mind, I guess. And you can feel it. I mean, striking, especially my first MMA gym, I did not have striking, and they kind of just like put me in and were like, all right, you're going to do this combo, whatever. And I would just get hurt. And if I didn't get hurt, then I just made stupid mistakes that weren't being corrected. And I remember it being really difficult because I felt, obviously I was like the bottom of the totem pole. And I went from being a black belt, a good, black belt competitor to being just not nobody, but just to not even knowing the language of striking or the footwork or the defense or anything like that. So here I am just like going for it. And then people are just like toying with me. And so it took me going to my gym now, Dynamics, and just going to intro classes. I still go to the fundamental classes. He's like, my coach tells me, I can come to the team training, but I need you to go to the fundamentals too, because if you don't have fundamentals, you don't have anything. You can't work off of that, right? It's not all spinning back kicks and stuff. So, learning literally like what a punch looks like in slow motion was huge. Like no one had ever taught me that. And so knowing like your own self and then knowing the technique and then not having to rely on the other person to dictate the pace or to just completely take advantage of you, which is really easy to succumb to, right? Especially as a female,
Totally. Because you go into like a protection mode too.
Yeah.
Like the amount of times where I've tapped gently guys at the side of the head with the head kick, right? Because I come from karate background. I'm very good at kicking. And like, I'll tap them in the head and I'll be like, oh shit, like as soon as I'll do that,
gonna react.
Yeah. I'll be like, I'll tap them and then I'll go like, we're still sparring. Is it sparring? I'll be like, I didn't, you didn't just earn the right to clock me with an overhand right. Okay, buddy. But
yes, that's scary.
It's scary. And like you said, it applies so well to real life because it's like mindfulness on steroids. You have to be in your body on steroids, right? Because you've got to be so aware of your physiology and their physiology, and like noticing little things like their nostrils flared, or like they took a big breath, or like, okay, now they're going to hit me, or like noticing myself, like, well, now I'm going into rage mode. You can really apply that to your outside life. And like, we're starting to see research backing that, you know, like some of my research, and a friend of mine, Christy Hitchens, she did a similar research project, and it showed that like the higher you get up in a belt rank system, the less you tend to have like anxiety, right? Because you learn to sit with your body, you learn to sit with these stressful situations. The more self-confidence you have, like the more self-belief you have, the more hours you spend training per week is correlated with your mental health. Like, who would have thought?
Wow.
But it's like, yeah, it's because we're in these like high pressure, feels like for your nervous system, identical, life and death. That's how it feels when you roll, when you spar. Yeah, exactly. And it gives you the opportunity to reconcile with that, and to sit with that and see how it sits for you, because it's different for everybody. Some people get angry and like rage. Some people burst into tears. They are like identical. I'm tears. I'm tears all the way.
If I'm angry, I cry. Like, if I'm frustrated, I cry. Have you ever heard of Adeline Gray, the USA wrestler?
No.
She had an article, okay, that she came out with that said she had, her response was crying, right? And she came from Olympic training center, and her coach was like, every time she would cry, he's like, I can't have this. Like, stop crying, right? Because she's like one of the only females on the mat. And so she went to her therapist, and her therapist said, well, when you cry, do you stop training? And she goes, no, I just sort of just cry and train. And she's like, so what is your coach so mad about? Because the equivalent would be if men get frustrated and go punch the wall or have a temper tantrum, and suddenly that's okay. Like that's being like, yeah, he's so dedicated, you know, he just really cares a lot. So that was just her response. And knowing that like some people are going to punch a wall and some people are going to cry, but the same underlying emotion of like frustration, or, you know, just like that self-awareness, it's going to produce different results. And in her, it was crying, and how crying is not a sign of weakness. Like, it's okay. I literally was crying in the back because I went and I caught a kick, right? And I'm thinking, I did something right. Now I'm going to take her down. And she starts punching me in the face. And I'm like, no one told me that was going to happen, that this person's going to fucking jump on one leg and still continue punching me in the face. And so I got really frustrated. I'm like, fuck this, you know, but I had already committed to being one of the rounds for one of the girls getting ready for her pro or UFC fight. So they're like screaming my name, like asking like where I am. So I literally like wiped the tears off, put my gloves on, get in the cage, and end up choking the girl out. And it was like this success story to the coach, because look at, she was crying and then she still was able to do it. It's like, yeah, idiot, of course, because it didn't change my abilities. It doesn't mean that like I'm stopping or that I give up. Like, no. But what's awful about it is that I had to go the 5 minutes, and this, like, I submitted her within like the first 2. And then right after, she kicked me in the solar plexus. And that was my first time ever experiencing that. And only I couldn't breathe. My whole, literally, I'm like on all 4, like just trying to find air. And the coach is like, we need somebody else. We need another body. They're literally just like pushing me to the side of the cage. Like, all right, this one's down. She's out. Someone else new. And so, yeah, it was a fucking heavy learning curve. But he was like using me as an example of like, wow, you know, look at her just so down, thinking she can't do it. Like, no, I didn't really think that I couldn't do it. I was just fucking angry because I know I can do it. And I'm just not, I don't have the right technique. I don't have the right coaching. I don't have this or that I'm missing. So I'm like, trust me, bro, like I will fucking cry and deck you in the face. Like I will do it at the same time. And also what you were saying about how the anxiety lessens as like, you know, the more experience. When I help people in competition, I always tell them, I'm like, you don't have to do everything, right? Like, cause obviously there's a lot in jiu-jitsu. And whenever your instructor is teaching something like maybe deep half or butterfly guard, things that maybe you don't really do, it's still good to know that someone else can do it to you, right? And just to have awareness of it. But also when you can be in a tournament and be in a situation and be like, I've been here before. Like, it doesn't even matter if you weather the storm well in training, but just to be like, instead of, because when you're rolling, you roll, right? You're just going. You don't have time to stop and be like, what would my professor do here? And so you don't have that. But sometimes it takes you out when you're like, holy shit, what are they doing? I've never seen this before. That's probably one of the worst feelings to have in a tournament, to just not know what to do and feel overwhelmed. So I'm like, if you could tell yourself, I've been here before, that is such an ego booster and like confidence booster, because you're like, okay, well, I know I'm not going to die if it's, an anxiety thing, or I know that, like this is going to happen or this is going to happen. But either way, it's just that like, okay, I've been here before, whether I feel like I know what to do, like just keep going. Cause deep down, like what you're going to do.
Yes, I feel like that was such a perfect circle around to what we spoke about at the beginning of this episode, which was that confidence is experiential, right? You can't really, like, there's a lot of hype, I think, around self-talk and imagining like what the fight's going to be like and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, if you haven't done the hard training, like you haven't been in the posture before, you can't lie to yourself. Like, you're smarter than that. You think you think your brain is dumb enough to be outsmarted by you. Like, it's, you know what I'm trying, it doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like with depression, you've got to get up and do things. You can't sit there trying to be like, okay, think positively. You can do it. Like,
just smile.
That's the hardest thing in the world, because you've got to be on it 24/7, right? But you could get up once for the day, and then you've got a piece of evidence that's like, I'm a person who gets out of bed. I'm a person who takes a shower. I'm a person who eats, right? I'm a person who's been in that position. So I know at least that I've survived it, right? We are experiential beings. So you need to create experiences for yourself that prove the kind of person that you want to be, whatever that is.
Yeah, there's I'm going to butcher this so bad, but there's a poet, and I found her on Instagram, the short ones.
Yeah.
And I wish I could remember the full poem, but it basically said like, I don't fret like when the world feels like it's ending, because the world has ended for me many times and begun again. It wasn't exact. I'm just paraphrasing.
It was still nice.
It's such a good one, because I'm like, yes, my anxiety, my whole entire life has made me feel not like the panic attack of like, oh, I'm having a heart attack, but more like everything as I know it is wrong, or everybody hates me. I have this dialogue that gets stuck in my head, and it keeps going. And, someone looks at me and that's just their face. And I'm like, oh my God, they hate me. And now I'm like, no one wants me here. I used to work myself up and just go cry in my car when no one said anything, right? It was all, just my imagination or just my interpretation of things. So yeah, I've been there, or I've been through like legit tough things, and, the sun rises again. Right. So I know what it's like to have my own mind tell me that like, I'm the worst human being ever. And I've also done things for myself and experienced things, wonderful things, and accomplished great things. And I do things that I fear because of that voice that tells me that you fucking suck, which is when I know that my depression is coming in. When I realize that I'm talking shit about myself, that's when I know that, okay, we're dealing with some depression there, and we need to work on it, right, and address it. But that has always been something that I've been really keen on, because I know that if left untreated, right, it's gonna turn into, well, I can't go to training because I didn't go the past 2 times, and now everyone thinks I'm lazy. Or, someone passed my guard, and now they just probably think I suck. And so like, I'm never going to get my purple belt, or whatever it is. There's so many things we tell ourselves. And it's just nice to know that like the experience of being there and knowing that like I have a track record, like I can look like on my wall, I have like seminar posters and stuff. I'm like, okay, I taught 11 seminars in Australia. I could fucking do this paper for school, it's important,
Yes. And it literally is. It's just like, if there was one like common theme of what we've been talking about today, it all just comes from showing up, like just from doing.
Yes. It's the easiest and hardest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I always say, right? Like I just have to go to train, like if I say I'm going to train 3 times a week, I just got to go. Well, yeah, it's fucking hard when I'm like, oh my God, I just wrote like a paper for 8 hours and now I have to go train at night and I'm probably going to be really sore. And, maybe I won't even learn anything about, it's like, no, you have to do now, think later. And other little tricks that I've learned along the way of, feel later about it, but just, that you have to do it, try to just get through it even. And sometimes it ends up being a really good training day. You don't really know. And sometimes you feel the greatest and you go in there and you just suck that day. But both of those experiences are valid and very, very important because that's what life is. Like you literally, it's like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. To be quite American. Yeah. Oh, by the way, really funny side story. So I was in Canada recently because my boyfriend lives in Niagara Falls. And then someone asked me like where I was from. And for some reason I just froze up because I'm thinking, do I say LA? Do I say California? Do I say, the States? So I just froze and go, America. I just said America. They were like, oh, nice, lovely. Like, oh God. Yeah, it happens.
Yeah. And then you're just like, thank you, nervous system. Like, come on, well, we're not going to kick in a little bit sooner there.
Yeah. I love how you always go back to like the science of it, which is funny because I'm in grad school now for sport and performance psychology.
Cool.
And like I have an EMT license and certification, but I'm not a first aid person. Like I'm not a science person. I would much rather be told a story about why I am the way I am rather than like, well, here's the synapse and this goes to this and this axiom and this. So it's funny because like, I feel like you and I like would work really well, like balancing because I'm the one that's more of like the storyline and you're also great at that too. But you always go back to the science of it, which I fully am aware that is important too. It's just never been my jam.
And that's the beautiful thing, right? Like you said, like people were going in, or you were going into people's gyms and they were like, you shouldn't make that face expression. You shouldn't talk like that. Well, it's like, we're not copy paste versions of each other. And actually the way that I explain it maybe isn't like as good for this person as the way you explain it on this day. And like the variety is the spice of life is like such a cliche, but it's like, it's important for a reason. We're all different. We all respond differently. Our brains work differently.
And what's amazing is, doing this podcast with you and not even knowing you at all and being able to jump on and learn so much and see that a lot of things that we've experienced are very different, but very, very similar just because we're both just little white girls or females or, combat sports athletes, there's a lot going on, our mental health advocates, things like that. So there's always that common thread. And I think that once you find that, it definitely, it doesn't matter how small or tiny or short that thread is, it's still the key and it can get bigger and stronger. Right. And like I always say with people in jiu-jitsu, I'm like, you don't understand. I go to other countries. I do not speak the language, but you hit and slap and bump and you roll and a tap is a tap, right? It's universal. They're very universal things or, sparring, right? Like you don't need words. It's just the martial art itself speaks for itself. And I love that.
Absolutely. Like the programs that I teach, like I specifically work with trauma survivors and we don't come in and be like, hey, this is what happened to me. This is what happened to you, right? We don't tell stories because we don't need to. We're in this beautiful position where it's a mutual understanding that everyone in the room's been through some shit, right? And so when someone says, I had a win today because I didn't dissociate from my body, like I stayed inside my body, I was not on the ceiling today. And everyone else in the room's like, nice one, like totally normal. I think that to me is my perception of like what Submit the Stigma is moving toward. It's like this mutual understanding that actually statistically so many people have gone through shit. So many people have anxiety right now. Pretty much the whole world has anxiety. We're living in a pandemic. This is a global trauma. And being like, okay, it's normal is just such a different feeling than when you feel like you're alone. You're the only person in the room who wants to run away and scream or cry or hit a wall or whatever your thing is.
People always thank me for what I do for Submit the Stigma. And I'm like, I feel selfish because I did this, having my dad die from suicide and then making it a known thing. Like I remember coming home and dealing with it and going to a grief counselor with my mom and my sister. And I was always very transparent about everything that I did. Like people followed my jiu-jitsu career and I was always doing I had the Pulling Guard zine, like a small magazine. I worked for Gracie Mag. Like I've always been part of the community and putting my path out there for other people to be like, oh my God, me too. But every time someone says that, I can relate or anything like that, I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. Like I feel less alone. So I created a community for me first and foremost. And so when people thank me for what I do by just talking about my own struggles, like I've spoken outwardly about being suicidal because I lost my first match at Worlds. And some people can't relate, but there's a lot of people who do compete that have put themselves in those positions. And yeah, like you don't even need to relate to understand that, okay, there's pressures and, people deal with different things and being able to just say, yeah, me too, like, or I can relate, or yeah, I've been there. And of course in jiu-jitsu, getting mounted, getting submitted, getting your guard passed, all these awful things are just completely relatable with other people. And it's just, you feel like, all right, so it's not a travesty every time this happens. And, I can come back and do it again. And I'm not gonna just because I tap doesn't mean that I've given up, And I think that there's so many universal things and cliches that can kind of go along with that. But it's definitely fun to hear that other people have the same ideas and to know that, yeah, I'm not alone. This person's not alone. There was one time a man had talked to me and said, yeah, I know I haven't been feeling that great, but I don't really want to, I don't want to talk about it with my family or anything, but I'm going to get help, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, if you don't let them know that you're struggling, then you don't give them an opportunity to help you, And he was really hit by that because, he was older. So maybe, his generation, you don't talk about your struggles. You just, you man up. Right. And so he was like, wow, I never really thought of that it's giving people that love me the opportunity to help me and care for me that I wouldn't otherwise have given them. Therefore, I'm going to struggle and then they won't even know. And that's one of the most awful things dealing with a past suicide when you don't know, you'll never know why. But having that opportunity given to me beforehand, if my dad had reached out to me beforehand, right? Like we always say oh, what I could have done or what I should have done. There's nothing, right? Like he made the decision, he was going to do it anyways. But if I had given that opportunity, I would have felt like I had contributed in a meaningful way rather than letting someone's mind rot until they feel that's the only option. So whenever I have the opportunity, when someone opens up to me like that, I always give them the benefit of the doubt. And I say, I don't care how many times people have either ignored your cries for help in the past. If you have a support system, you need to let people know and you need to use it and make yourself available. Like that's your burden, right? Because people, yes, you have to reach for help, but sometimes all it takes is one conversation and that appointment that you were too scared to make, someone's going to make it for you. That ride that you didn't have to get to that appointment, that person's going to take you, right? So there's so much kindness in the world that we sometimes forget about that. And just knowing that if you ask for it, if you ask, you're much more likely to receive the help you need. So there's a burden there's a duty on both sides, right? You have to be willing to get the help, but you also have to, be a good person for other people. And that's how the world fucking goes around, right?
And I often tell people we're wired for selfishness, and selfishness actually for our wiring is being part of community. And that means helping people. And what that means is when you help someone, forget if you even step back and forget the impact of that, right, that they would go seek help, that it might save their life. If you just think selfishly about how it benefits you when you help someone, well, you get a big old dose of dopamine when you're in mission mode, like helping them. You get serotonin when you like connect over the fact that you help them. Like you get all these feel good chemicals in your brain that make you feel great, that make you live longer, that give you like all these health benefits, if you even want to think about it like that, from helping people. And innately people want to help because of that. Like those kind of things are what we're wired for. So even thinking like, oh, it's a burden, I think even the perspective, like if you told me after this podcast, like, Georgia, I'm feeling suicidal, I really need to talk to someone, like I actually just feel like I can talk to you right now. When I help you, I'm not going to be like, fuck, like I've got shit to do, like fuck, like I'm actually going to be like, this is when I'm available to help you right now if I'm not free right now. And then the act of helping you is going to make me feel good too. Because that's what we are wired for. We are wired to help each other. Like people who don't feel good from helping each other are sociopaths. They're the minority. They are like the 1%. But we assume that like that's what people think burden, but like the default thought is like, I want to help. I get to help. Thank God.
Right. Unfortunately, I think our generation, especially with technology and whatnot, it's like we're overloaded, but also, we're overwhelmed. Like we're like millennials are expected to go to college, afford college, somehow get this great paying job, but also care for kids that we are supposed to have and the relationships, and also be saving for a house. And, oh, you can get a house if you just stop eating that avo toast. People are making jokes because the US is in like so much debt, and they're like, just stop having avocado toast and lattes. And we have this like, it just doesn't work the way it used to, and it hasn't fully adapted to it yet, and it's like we know we're the generation that kind of like knows what it was like before and after, and we're like in between, because our parents are like, you should do this, and we're like, it doesn't work like that anymore. And then our employers are telling us one thing and whatever. So I feel like it's very hard to find time to help others. But it's one of those things like exercise. Like for me, I find it so hard to exercise, especially during the pandemic, like on my own, because it's like, you have to go from sitting on the couch to like lifting a barbell. And I think about like, well, how do I do that? Like, do I like, and then I don't think about it when I'm warming up in class, because someone's running the warm up and I'm just like, okay, this is what we do. Or of course, when I get on the mat, I stretch. But when I'm at home and I'm thinking, well, this is where I watch TV, I don't think about like, okay, I'm going to warm up this way, I have to do this. You have to really motivate yourself to do it. And I think we need so many reasons why we shouldn't exercise, right? But we have so many reasons why we shouldn't help others, because we think, well, why should I help someone else when I could be helping myself? But then we don't help ourselves anyways. So I think the act of getting over that hump and helping someone else in turn makes you care about yourself. It's really weird. Like, I remember like when I was growing up, like it was so hard to clean my room because I'm always overthinking it and thinking like, well, I may need that later on. Or you kind of go, I don't know where it should go. Should it go in the bathroom or should it stay in my room? Whereas you clean someone else's room and you're like, no, logically, this should go here and this should go here. And, and you're like, that was so easy. I feel so good about this. So sometimes it can be actually easier solving someone else's problems than your own, but it will give you the motivation to think, wow, I could have applied that same solution to my issue too.
Yeah, we get like that experiential thing. Like sometimes it's so hard to call and book a therapist. You can be like, okay, I'm going to book it for someone else. Like, hi, I'm booking it for someone else. And then you'd be like, well, fuck, like I just got to say a different name. That's the only difference. Yeah. And then I could book it for me. So it's like, I could probably swing it, right? I've been like 99% there once. So I could do the 1%.
Yeah, exactly. I remember the first time someone offered to do that for me, and it was something huge. Like I didn't realize that. Our healthcare is a little bit different and a lot more shitty. So it's like you have to go off of like your insurance, and if you can only go to a certain doctor, but you can't go to a specialist doctor until you go to your family doctor, and they have to sign off on it. But they can't just sign off on it. They've got to talk to your insurance company. Your insurance company has to say yes. All of these crazy things and all of these burdens. And so when someone offered to do that for me, usually it's my mom. Like my mom will do that for me if I need her to. She's retired. She doesn't mind sitting on the phone. But, for someone to do that, I didn't end up using him. I was able to do it myself. But having him say that, I was like, wow, I never thought that I could just simply do this task that has become huge for someone else that is really not that bad, but I don't have the emotional stigma against it. It would be really easy to do that. And so sometimes I find the way to do things is to pretend that it's for someone else. And to feel like I have no emotional attachment to like getting a paper done, right? Like I know I need to get it done, but then I'm like, but is it my best work? And am I in the right mindset to write great, you know? And it's like, no, the deadline doesn't care. The teacher doesn't care. You get that shit done. So when I'm working on that, I just think like, I don't care. I don't have an emotional investment into how this paper is. I'm just going to do it the best I know how and the way that I've been taught with the capabilities that I have at this very moment, because that's all I can do. And that's exactly what I would tell someone, like, what can you control and what can't you control? Do that, right? And so, yeah, when you take the emotion out of it, and I'm a very, very emotional person. So as we've talked about, me crying and being angry and all these things. So it's very hard to take the emotion out of things. But once you do, and especially in, like you were saying, when you notice that you're breathing heavier, you're breathing out of your mouth, and you realize that it's more of an emotional response, and rather than like working on the technique, it's something that is huge. Like something that I did was counting to 3 every time I got into a position, rather than worrying, oh my God, what if I can't control, what if I can't hold it down, or what if I can't do this? And what if I wanted to really get mount, but now they've trapped my foot, and all these things. So I usually just try to stay where I'm at, like 1, 2, 3, because in competition, you have to hold the position.
I'm gonna say it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so when I was rushing things, just because the other person was moving a lot, I thought, well, no, I have to separate myself from that person and not pick up their emotions. Being an empath, it's kind of like, you always just pick up on, like, if someone else is nervous, I end up getting nervous. I can't help it. And so I have to remember to like break that, and remember that, like, I don't have emotional investment in this. Even if I do, I have to pretend that I don't for that time being. It's the same in competition. Like, if I think, like, some people are like, I just really want to win. I want to win so bad. And then they win because they wanted to win bad. I don't know how that works, because for me, the more I want it, the more I fuck up, because the more that I put pressure on myself. So being able to perform is a whole nother thing. And particularly why I'm doing a degree in it is because I want to know, like, how to separate it and how to just keep it where it's just, nope, this is just me doing a task, and the task is going to be performed because I have performed it many times before. And really making it that simple, and making it not like an emotional thing in terms of, oh my God, I'm a failure if I lose, and if I win, I am a goddess. Like, it's very not much. That's not like that, and even if you do think it is, it's not. People who love you are still going to love you no matter what.
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer for how to like take your expectation of how you think you're going to go in a fight. Like every fight that I think I'm like guaranteed to win, I feel like I lose. And when it's like the opposite,
Yeah.
And it's so funny because people are like, you've got to really, really believe in yourself. And like, that's what's going to get you there. Well, like, for example, my last comp, I lost like immediately in gi, which was like the main thing I was there for. And I had signed up for no gi the next day because I was like, oh, I'll just like chuck my hat in the ring and like see how I go. And I won. And I was like,
yeah, exactly.
It was because I had no pressure.
I've always wanted to be a gi world champion, and I've gone on the podium like 5 times, but it was no gi worlds that I won. And I'm like, I don't even like no gi that much. And it's because the pressure wasn't there. It's like, instead of being like, what would my best self do? It's like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, because it's not the fact that you have to do well. It's the fact that you have to do well at whenever you get called to your mat, whenever, your opponent is ready to go, the ref is at that moment, you have to be at your best, and I realized, no, you don't. You just have to do what you know how to do. And I remember Marcelo had always said, never worry about your second or third match. Also, because it's a bracket and you don't know who you're going to face, even if it's like the world champion from 3 years, you never know what's going to happen. You can't plan on who you're going to face. And he goes, if you're so worried about the second match, you won't pay attention to the first. You have to give everything in the first, because if you don't and you lose, you don't get another chance. You don't get the second fight. So like some people will think like, oh, I have to conserve my energy to be able to do it, to be able to go on to the next, 3 more matches. Like, well, no, buddy, you're not going to have 3 more matches if you don't give everything to win this one, So one match at a time has always been my like, I guess, grounding statement to myself that, okay, I'm just going to take this round, see what happens, and I'll know more at the end of it, instead of going, okay, this is how it's going to go. This is how it's, because it's fucking crushing when it doesn't go the way that you plan or the way that you hope. So yes, envisioning is important, but because you have to see yourself there, but at the same time, like you can't apply, like what you're talking about is your expectations, right? And so I was talking to a white belt recently, and he was saying how he thinks that a fight or like a role is like a conversation. And I said, kind of, but it's more like a debate, because you are trying to impose your will. You're still trying to win. Sometimes training can be a conversation. What do you got? Okay, cool. I'm going to do this. Oh, what do you got? What do you got? But when it comes down to a competition or like sparring role, and this guy's like never competed before, so he wouldn't really understand. I'm like, no, I'm going to use my best tactics to beat you, and you're going to use your best tactics to beat me. It's not really about what you do best, because maybe I'm the kryptonite to that, or I have you have to have multiple options, right? You have to attack from many angles. So it was really interesting to see him say that. And I'm like, no, not really, buddy. It's not like that. Go try to compete.
And I think like what you said, like just getting through the first one is just like we were saying with like, just get one in a row, right? Just get up and go to training once, and then go to training once. Don't be like, okay, I'm going to train 30 days, 30 classes, or like some bullshit like that. Right. It's a huge expectation. Just like get out of bed, just eat a meal, just have one shower, right? Don't be like, I'm going to have a shower every day. Just be like, just do one thing, and then that's like accumulates, right?
The only goal I gave myself when this pandemic started was to shower every day, to make sure that I take at least one shower every day. Not that I normally don't take showers, but the fact that, because when I was younger and I never left the house because I didn't drive yet, and like all my friends, whatever, like I would just stay home during the summer when I didn't have class, and I wouldn't shower for like 3 days. And mom would be like, you're disgusting. I'm like, I don't know, I'm a teenager, like leave me alone. But to know that like, no matter what, even if I'm not allowed to leave my house, and I do not leave my house, and I don't see anybody for days, that shower is key. And that's going to keep me feeling like a human being, rather than being like, just holed up in my house where I feel like I'm not essential. I can't touch people. And, like all these things that I'm used to doing, I can't do. So to feel like a human, I was like, I gave myself that rule. And I'm so happy to report that it's been good. I've showered at least once every day. And so I think I kept the bar pretty low, but yeah, I'm succeeding so far.
I mean, I think for a lot of people who do sport, like in martial arts, that's actually a hard thing, because you're like, well, I shower after I get sweaty, right? So it's like, if I didn't get sweaty, why would I shower? Sometimes I think that I'm like, well, I haven't trained today. What's the reason to shower? The only reason I shower every day is because I sleep in the bed with another person, and people complain. Like, truly.
I consider my bed like my sanctuary now. Like my boyfriend likes to fall asleep with the TV on. This past month, he was watching Dragon Ball Z. So that was a lot of like, boo, like as I'm trying to sleep. And every time I'm like, can you turn that down? He's like, oh, and so I always make sure that like that is my my time. I never realized how much rest and recovery were like that important until I started getting older. Like being 32 is not bad, but being 32 and having 12 years of martial arts experience of just, it's like, yeah, my body's not as equipped as most people. It's better off than people who sit in an office all day and don't move. But it's like, to be able to continuously have output and give my all in training, I have to rest and I have to eat right and I have to do all these things. And so the whole experience of people being like, well, it's okay, I only got 3 hours of sleep and I'm fine. It's like, cool brag, dude. Like I got 9. I'm still tired, but I got 9. So my body is actually like ready to go. You know what I mean? But
absolutely.
Yeah, like just kind of going off of the whole thing has been also balance, right? Just being able to balance the amount of, output and input. And the whole idea of like self-care, filling your cup, right, is something that is so important. And when you have to take time off of the output, when you don't have as much output, you have to see it as having input. And being able to like recharge yourself, because if you don't, and you're constantly running on fumes, you're just going to end up hating life.
Yep.
And you're going to assume that it's something that you're doing wrong, or that you're literally incapable of doing, when really you're just not giving yourself the opportunity. And so balance and recovery is super important.
I just realized that I could have gone off on another tangent, but we've been talking for nearly 2 hours and I'm like super mindful that you probably want to go to bed.
Eventually, yeah. I got training.
We're talking about the importance of sleep and I'm like, well, it's getting pretty late there.
that sleep.
Yeah. Do what we say and know what we do, okay?
Yes, of course.
No. So if people want to share their stories, or if they just want to get in contact, read the stories, where can they find you? Where are you on social media, etc.?
Submit the Stigma is the screen name or the username for the Instagram. We don't really use the Facebook anymore because whatever.
Facebook.
Yeah, we're always on Instagram. So Instagram there, the email is submitthestigma@gmail, but that's also on the Instagram. So that's the best place. If you want to read like the full story of how Submit the Stigma was started, then you can go to submitthestigma.org. My personal handle is just at Erin Herle. So you can find me there. I'm always on Instagram. I think I talk more on Instagram than texting or anything else. So I'm always there to answer people's questions and to interact, because like I said, like I put my story out there, and when people share theirs, I feel less alone. So it's not a burden for me to hear other people's stories and stuff. So, and we post them on the Submit the Stigma page, and I haven't done that in a while. So I should probably be collecting more stories because I want to be able to keep it up. But if you read all of them, like there's a bunch on there, and they're really great, and they're definitely not going out of style. So if you go from the first to the last, it's like reading like a poetry book. It's kind of nice. No. Yeah, it's like a feel good thing. And you realize that other people struggle, but also that they have found similar avenues. And if you're already training, then you're already headed in the right path that all of these people have gone on. And maybe it gives you a new perspective. Maybe it gives you just some validation or reassurance. All of those are really valid and important things to have as a person who deals with mental health. But also if you don't have a mental health issue and you just want to see how the other half lives, that's always a good one too.
That's funny. When you said as a person with mental health, I was like, so you mean a person, right?
Yeah, right. And I'm like, yeah, wait, pretty much everybody, but we don't like to say that. I kind of go like, yeah, mental health issues, mental illness, things like that. But I realized that a lot of people go, nope, that's not me. That's not me. And then when I go, when you almost hit the car in front of you and your whole body just goes, I'm like, yeah, that, like that can happen without an actual response. That can just happen for the fuck of it. But you know what I'm experiencing and you know what I'm talking about. They're like, oh, so yeah, people don't need diagnoses to experience mental health issues. It could be grief, and it could be loss. It could be loss of a job, a pet, a lifestyle. It could be anything, like different changes. Obviously the pandemic has been global, so we have had extremely relatable experiences from across the freaking globe, literally everybody. So yeah, and I think we're finally coming out, like knock on wood, like we're coming out on the other side.
Yeah.
of the pandemic. So I'm hoping that like people have learned this and have kind of, instead of being so divisive and being so defensive, I guess, on your views about things, it's more about seeing that common thread. Like no matter how small and how insignificant it seems, it is definitely something that would keep people, relating. And I think that's important, and connecting, because that's what we need right now above everything else.
Have you thought of something to be grateful for today? What was it? I'm grateful for the amazing women that train with me at the Fight Back Project. I'm grateful for Nari and the beautiful song Shape Me, heard at the beginning and end of every episode. And I'm grateful for you, for listening to this show and helping martial arts keep saving lives. So thank you, from the bottom of my heart. If you'd like to leave me a review to help more people find the show, that's a bonus.
You need to know that nobody shapes me but me. Don't gotta tell you what my name is, I don't gotta explain it. Walk in the room, hear a boom erupting like I'm famous. I'm here shedding shells, I'm shameless. I fear nothing, no complacence. Walk too many tight ropes with no hope, so I became this poster they hold over all the heads of trauma holders. You don't need to know my history, I move boulders. Atlas shrug, cause I lifted the weight up off his shoulders. No pretense of defense, move first like chess soldiers. This goes deeper than empowerment, cause I'm the one to power it. Physical meets mental, challenge me to keep devouring. If I can't change the scenery, at least I change perspectives. No longer isolated, but elevated and selective. Darkest places become beautiful spaces. This is where rage meets patience, meets power meets gracious. Meets, we're so glad you came, and the feeling is contagious. When you the walking impact of intended bad intentions. When you the manifesting of collecting all they tensions. You the soul and body hold it all and still remember. But I'm a work in progress, testament to all contenders. Forgot what it was like to have control over self. Forgot what it was like to be the one in charge. Forgot in my reflection I could see all my wealth. Forgot that with my bare hands I break all these bars, barriers and obstacles. They can't cage me, they can't chronicle all my experiences and reduce them to appearances. When I was truly beaten, gave myself clearances to fall down, mess up, and get myself back up. I'm not looking for clovers cause I don't believe in luck. Damn, you a badass, I heard them say it clearly. Why thank you very much, I know now I'm not weary of what's next for me. Cause I expect to see growth like I was planted, watered, fed, and bloomed to be. The positivity and accountability, knowing they won't step if I'm the agent of my agency. I think I found my voice again, huh? I think I found my voice again, huh? I'm not sorry, you're the end where I begin. Boundaries, I know them well. Take a breath and meditate. Who is she? I know her well. Now I get to open gates. 1, 2, 1, 2. I don't need your permission. And if you get uncomfortable, then use your intuition to know that I won't stay where respect is ever missing. And everything I do, that's me making decisions. It's truly underrated, the value of self-worth. Forgot that I was rich from the moment of my birth. A penny for my thoughts, no really, you can't afford it. You cannot buy my story, rewrite it, or record it. You cannot buy my story, rewrite it, or record it, huh?